Don't tell me that this matter was targeted at me. Klein was alarmed as he immediately became abnormally awake. As a person who had several similar experiences, he had quite a persecution complex. It really is possible the Mother Tree of Desire used their dream to send Flight Ken a revelation just as I arrived at Oravi Island and began an entire series of plans. The first day I met Bilt Brando was the day the Naturism sect held the ritual to make the tramp stand and die from gluttony. If they were targeting Admiral Emirius, the plan needed to ensure that there was no lack of a stand-in, and that he couldn't find an additional helper or other means to conceal his departure. But clearly, this is something that cannot be confirmed. My involvement is proof. If the target was me, then the previous problem is explained. Klein used his clown powers to control his facial expression as he gloomily looked at Flight Ken. With such a theory, more questions emerged in his mind. But how were they certain that Bilt Brando would seek me out? The news of Gemon Sparrow being able to change into anyone was spread from Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. It's an element beyond the Mother Tree of Desire's control. Of course, taking a different point of view, it's precisely due to the spreading of this news and my arrival in Oravi Island that made the Mother Tree of Desire send the revelation and put the plan into motion. But why would she want to corrupt me? My grudge with the Rose School of Thought hasn't reached the point of garnering the attention of an evil god. All I did was kill a Sequence 5 Wraith, a Sequence 6 Zombie, and a Sequence 7 Werewolf, with Miss Sharon and Marek. Snatching away the Scarlet Luna Corona and biological poison bottle, my hunt against Admiral of Blood was terminated before it even started. It was an idea that didn't translate into action. The only thing that happened was the killing of Steel Mavity. The act of revenge that resulted from this matter shouldn't even exceed the attention of a saint. Was it something special about me that resonated with some item formed by the aura of the Mother Tree of Desire on this island the moment I stepped onto it? But I've never faced any abnormal reactions from the holy artifacts left behind by other deities in Backland or Tingen City. Furthermore, I did divine the matter above the Grey Fog and received the revelation that the death of the tramp was solely a coincidence. It wasn't arranged by a legendary creature or Grade Zero sealed artifact, but the outcome ended up different. This is the first time that divination above the Grey Fog has been disrupted in the true sense of the word. I didn't even notice that it had been disrupted. Klein's thoughts came to a pause as he discovered the most serious problem. Back when the matter involved 0-08, all he received was an ineffective revelation and not a disrupted outcome. Therefore, it's a power that exceeds a Grade Zero sealed artifact. The Mother Tree of Desire personally disrupted the matter, and she is a true deity herself. But it's very difficult for the seven gods to influence the real world. There has to be a corresponding ritual. Yes, I had also divined the risks of acting as a Mirius above the Grey Fog and received a revelation saying that it was an acceptable risk. The outcome does match the development of the situation, so it wasn't disrupted. The more Klein thought about the matter, the more perplexed he became. What was most incomprehensible about it was that if the target of corruption was himself, why didn't he suffer any demanding trials, and he instead solved the problem in a relatively simple manner? This made the Mother Tree of Desire's arrangement appear like a joke. While pondering with this weight in mind, Klein nearly crushed Flight Ken. He asked again to verify his conjecture. To his surprise, the Naturism sect hadn't held any rituals to request the Mother Tree of Desire to disrupt any divination over the past week. They didn't make any special arrangement same towards the failure of the project. Strange Klein took out a gold coin and flicked it as a final confirmation. Even without divination, he was almost certain that Flight Ken wasn't lying. Firstly, the man was already on the brink of a mental collapse, making him lack the ability to fabricate something reasonable. Secondly, Flight Ken's answers adhered to logic, completely confirming whatever Klein had deliberately kept to himself. The gold coin landed in his open palm, the king's portrait facing up, indicating a positive response. Combined with the divination statement, Klein finally confirmed that Flight Ken wasn't lying. After temporarily suppressing his puzzlement, he cast his gaze towards Flight Ken once again. He asked without a smile, "What deeds have you done in the past that violate the kingdom's laws or the moral fabric of society?" Flight Ken was taken aback for a few seconds as his mental state seemed to instantly turn for the better. From his point of view, his ploy against Admiral Emirius was the most serious crime, something that would most easily enrage this important figure. Everything else was trivial and nothing that needed the demigod to waste his time and energy on. Therefore, after skipping the important matters and coming to an ordinary topic, it meant that he might enjoy a good outcome. Flight Ken couldn't help but reveal a discreet smile as he hastened to recount. "I once tortured a family for an entire night for their property and abandoned them in the woods after murdering them. Then, I used fake documents and successfully obtained a sizable amount of wealth. I deliberately enticed many believers to indulge in their desires and watched as their emptiness and regret after the deed slowly paved the way for them to become fertilizer for the Mother Tree of Desire. I once tricked many ladies to abide with their nature, an excuse for them to be redeemed by the spirits, allowing me to possess them. I tortured believers who attempted to renounce the religion, slicing off every part that protruded off their bodies." He recounted each and every sin of his, without any thoughts of concealing the truth. Klein felt disbelief with what he heard. He never expected anyone to be evil to this extent. As Flight Ken got increasingly excited from recounting his past deeds, he saw Admiral Emirius stand up without an expression before circling around the desk and standing in front of him. The Admiral then raised his left palm. A terrifying mouth appeared in the middle of the left palm, revealing 2 rows of illusory, white, and eerie teeth that were icy cold. No, a sharp and horrified scream resounded in the room for a long time until silence prevailed. After a while, Klein bent down to pick up a blob of greyish-white light that resembled a shrunken brain. This was the beyond characteristic of a lunatic. Unfortunately, Flight Ken had been searched before being brought here. He didn't leave behind any cash or items. Klein snapped his fingers and ignited the rest of the clothes. As he looked at his left shoulder, which was beginning its recovery process, he sat behind the desk and remained silent amidst the dancing scarlet flames. Once the traces were no longer noticeable, he pulled at a corresponding rope, making the bell outside ring. Lewin released the restriction and entered, instinctively observing every corner. "Instruct the guards and the base personnel to cooperate with the Oravi police to do a clean-up of the Naturism sect. It's best if clues can be found and the number of Rose School of Thought members are caught." Klein solemnly gave the order. "Yes, Your Excellency," Lewin answered respectfully. He didn't ask where Flight Ken was, as though the leader of the Naturism sect never existed. Klein didn't pay too much attention to the raid on Oravi Island. Using the excuse that he was slightly injured, he declined the remaining schedules for the next 2 days. This meant that he didn't need to worry about needing to exude the might of a high-sequence Beyonder of the Arbiter pathway after expending the 9th law charm. Nearing noon, Lewin entered after knocking the door and reported, "Your Excellency, Mr. Aston has yet to leave on the liner. The new Governor-General, Benken Raid, has sent an invitation to participate in the banquet he's hosting tonight. Benken Raid, the person who replaced Aston as Governor-General according to what I know, Viscount Kenraid's family is a loyal subject of the royal family. To Lim likely got to know Prince Edisake while being the equestrian teacher of Viscount Kenraid's youngest son. Klein nodded gently as he immersed himself in Amirius Rievelt's complex emotions. He remained silent for a few seconds before saying, "Inform Governor General Kenraid that it's inconvenient for me to attend the banquet because of the injuries suffered from the Naturism sect's assault. Apologize to him on my behalf." "Yes, Your Excellency." Lune didn't persuade him otherwise and calmly left the room. A demigod definitely had the right to be willful. As long as he didn't engage in some secret ploy or commit any serious mistake, there was no way he would be blamed regardless of what he did. This was because any faction would be willing to rope in a demigod. As he watched Lune's back vanish from the door, Klein shook his head indiscernibly and sat back behind the desk. A quiet day quickly passed. When it was almost midnight, Klein, who was sleeping in the guest room, suddenly woke up and sat up. His spiritual perception told him that someone had entered the house. Klein focused his gaze at the window and saw a middle-aged man in a tailcoat. He had black hair and blue eyes, with the corners of his mouth slightly sagging. He was none other than Admiral Amirius. "Phew, he's finally back." Klein slowly stood up and cautiously asked, "What item did you give me before?" He was afraid that the Admiral Amirius before him was also a faceless in disguise. Admiral Amirius stood there and answered with a stern expression, "The 9th Law Charm." Without waiting for Gem and Sparrow to speak again, he took 2 steps forward and calmly asked, "Did anything happen in the past few days?" Klein controlled his facial muscles and said, "Your secretary committed a mistake and was injured." "Oh, what else?" Admiral Amirius nodded with deep reservation. Klein tried hard not to move his gaze away as he looked straight at him and said, "Your younger brother has been relieved of his post as Governor General. The new Governor General has already taken over. Your Miss Cynthia mutated into a monster and was purified by me. A number of your bodyguards and attendants were infected to a certain extent and are currently receiving treatment." Amirius's expression turned into shock bit by bit in an uncontrollable manner. His eyes moved slightly, as though he suspected whether he had returned to the wrong place. It had only been 3 days. After a frozen moment of silence, Amirius quickly brought his expressions under control. He said in a domineering and deep tone, "Tell me the specifics." Klein didn't hide much of the truth. He began with Aston Rievelt's question, before mentioning the warning from the mysterious person in the dream, and how he was told not to make a choice that resisted the trend of the times. Following that, he talked about the sudden telegram, and finally he spoke of Cynthia's mutation. He went into detail about the situation, the arrogance of the secretary, how he dealt with it, and the general investigations that followed. The only information he kept to himself was that the 4th of February was the first day he arrived on Orabai Island, as well as his subsequent guesses. Of course, he was also very vague with matters regarding combat. He believed that Admiral Amirius was understanding enough. After all, what a Beyonder was good at or what unique abilities he had were one of their greatest secrets. If they were exposed or understood by others, it gave others a chance of setting up a targeted ambush, making it possible for them to die under the hands of an enemy of a lower sequence. Below that of high sequence Beyonders, many Beyonders could be very powerful or very weak. After Amirius listened to the recount in silence, his expression didn't seem to change in the dark room. However, the fact that he hadn't interrupted Klein's recount implied something. After a few seconds of silence, he asked in a deep voice, "The mysterious person who infiltrated your dream emphasized the fate of an era, as well as the trend of the times?" Yes, Klein had already changed back into Gem and Sparrow's appearance. He didn't deliberately go into detail that the mysterious person had never mentioned Aston Rievelt's exact plan. Amirius fell silent again. "You maintained my appearance in your dream?" "Yes, this is my secret," Klein answered succinctly. Amirius nodded indiscernibly as he paced around in a tiny area before looking back at Gem and Sparrow. "There were no problems with your choices." Upon hearing this, Klein seemed to receive the ultimate and most effective feedback. A large portion of the potion in him was digested as a result. Amidst the deep, reverberating tone, Amirius turned his body to the side and said without any hint of emotion, "I originally had no plans to have a contract with the stand-in. And instead I wanted to inform Cynthia that I had the symptoms of losing control, making it impossible for me to have any physical relationship with her for 5 days. However, I later changed my mind due to certain reasons. If not for the temporary contract's forceful restriction, even if I'm able to withstand the temptations during usual times, I might not have been able to resist the magnified desires last night. Of course, if Cynthia knew of the 5-day restriction ahead of time, she wouldn't be in such a rush to consume the powder ground from the proliferation necklace. It would have prevented her from sensing the mother tree of desire and end up mutating, but as such, the ball is in the Naturism sect's court. They could have made up an excuse to get Cynthia to consume it. This matter was really targeted at me. What does the mother tree of desire actually want? Also, what was the reason that caused Admiral Amirius to make such an important change? Klein seemed to grasp the crux of the matter as he looked at Amirius' side profile. What's the reason? Amirius said with a deadpan expression. There's no need for you to know. For the first time in his life, Klein hated such a response. After some thought, he took out the cracked pendant and threw it at Amirius. This is the proliferation necklace that originated from the mother tree of desire. Amirius raised his hand to catch it before looking down. You may leave. Go to Bill to receive your reward. Aren't you worried that I know of something I'm not supposed to know? That's right. Aston's ploy has been exposed and is known by his political enemies. As for Amirius, he was clearly not involved. Therefore, it doesn't matter if I understand anything. Klein imagined that there would be a long-term confidential compact, but to his surprise, he could leave just like that. Noticing that Amirius didn't raise another matter, he pointed at him and said, "Clothes." Only then did Admiral Amirius look up, silently taking off the formal attire comprised of a shirt and tailcoat. Klein had originally wished to ask for additional payment due to the excessive dangers that went beyond the scope of the original agreement. But after secretly confirming that Cynthia's outcome was because of him, he abandoned the idea while feeling guilty. He quickly took off the comfortable sleeping robe, switched into a tailcoat, and under Amirius's guidance, leaped out of the window, and secretly left the gardened villa while the bodyguard's eyes were confounded. Amirius donned a sleeping robe and clenched the proliferation necklace before walking to the window. He stood there silently as he faced the crimson moon and few stars in the dark night. He stood there without an expression, not even changing his posture for a long period of time. He slightly relaxed his clenched fist as the miniaturized rhinoceros horn fell to the ground in the form of shattered pieces, bit by bit, fragment by fragment. The next day at noon, Klein, who had slept soundly the entire night, left the inn and took a carriage to Sweet Lemon Bar. He went to the second floor to meet Bilt Brando. It's over, Bilt asked with relief and surprise. Klein nodded and said, Admiral Amirius has returned. Where's the rest of the payment? Bilt revealed an unconsiderable smile. After he dismissed his guards, he personally went to a safe and took out the remaining £500 and a blue cufflink. This is the mystical item created from the Murloc blood you provided, Bilt introduced. It can provide illusory scales hidden beneath the skin, so you will be as difficult to catch as a fish. It will also help withstand a certain level of damage for you. With it, you can dive to at least 15 meters without any protective gear. You can freely move about in the water for 10 minutes. It doesn't have any serious negative effects. It will just make you tired easily when in a hot or arid place. That means this cufflink shouldn't be used. With the sun approached, Klein extended his hand to collect the money and item. Aren't you afraid that there will be problems? Bill cracked a joke. Your business is here, Klein answered calmly. His meaning was clear. If there were any problems, he wasn't afraid that the person in charge would go missing. Bill's smile froze as he said, it hasn't been named. You can give it one. Murdoch Cufflink. Klein couldn't be bothered to waste his brain cells. Nice name. It leaves quite an impression, Bill said with a forced smile. He paused for a moment before saying, that artisan said that he can fix the summoning ritual of a spirit world creature onto materials with spirituality. It will be able to last a maximum of 1.5 years, but you will need to provide detailed information. Hey, according to our agreement, I'll be responsible for it, so there's nothing to be worried about. All right, make it a harmonica. Klein took out a pen and paper from his pocket and scribbled the ritual to summon his messenger. Messenger? This is rather rare. It's very hard for Beyonders not from the death pathway to find a suitable one. Bill received the piece of paper and casually scanned it. A. If the messenger is accidentally summoned during the production process, a gold coin has to be given to her. What happens if it's not given? Hey, spirit world creatures always have something odd about them. I've seen some who love music, as well as ones who loiter around shit. What happens if you don't give one? Perhaps Mamrie Neptinecker might bring the heads of you and the artisan to me. She's a creature with a castle in the spirit world. She might even be stronger than me. Well, under situations when I'm not using the sea god scepter, Klein lampooned as he said in a deep voice, the third promised item can be left to the future. All right, Bill didn't have any objections. Following that, he asked out of curiosity, Mr. Gemman, how did you fool Secretary Lewin, Governor General Aston, and Miss Cynthia, people who Admiral Mirius specifically mentioned? Klein did his best to prevent his facial muscles from twitching. Follow the information and think about it carefully. He didn't provide an exact description before he stood up and bowed with his hat. It's time I bid farewell. It was a pleasure working with you, Bill answered with a smile. After watching Gemman Sparrow's figure vanish behind the door, he shook his head and chuckled, muttering, this powerful and crazy adventurer is actually a natural actor. After lunch, his subordinate sent him the day's papers. As Bill sucked on a cigar, he flipped through it when his expression suddenly froze. Last night, the new Governor General, Benken Raid, held a banquet. New Governor General Aston Reveldt has been relieved of his position as Governor General. Bill picked up the other sets of newspapers and found the same piece of information. With his connections in Orabai, he should have long heard of news regarding a replacement of the Governor General. However, the replacement was extremely sudden. Most people only learned of the situation when the new Governor General officially made his appearance. After a while, a partner who was secretly serving Admiral Mirius entered the room. Your Excellency wants you to investigate the people around you for naturism sect believers and sink them all into the sea, the partner passed on Mirius's instructions. All right, Bill asked curiously, what exactly happened? The naturism sect suffered a terrible blow since yesterday. His Excellency suffered an assassination attempt from the naturism sect yesterday. Miss Cynthia perished as a result. Secretary Lewin was injured, and the Admiral lost many of his bodyguards, the partner described simply. Bill was momentarily stunned. Aren't these the people Admiral Mirius mentioned to be careful of when acting in front of them? I even specially emphasized it to Gemman Sparrow. Now, Miss Cynthia is dead, Secretary Lewin is injured, and Aston Reveldt has been relieved of his position as Governor General. The corners of Bill's mouth twitched while he wore a blank expression. East Chester County, Stone City. Audrey silently listened to a noble lady's words, echoing her from time to time as she provided an ear to listen to. Towards the end, the noble lady praised her sincerely. Audrey, you really are an angel. I feel a lot more comfortable after chatting with you. At this moment, Audrey saw the female priest from the Church of Evernight enter. Hence, she exchanged pleasantries before walking over with a smile. This priest appeared ordinary, as she only provided low-level preachings, but in fact, she was a secret member of the psychology alchemists. Audrey, the potion formula is already in my hands. However, you need to contribute enough to obtain it, the female priest whispered while no one was paying attention. Audrey's eyes darted around slightly as she said, that wouldn't be an issue. However, Ma'am Smin, can you tell me its name? The female priest looked around before saying with a suppressed voice, hypnotist. After leaving the Sweet Lemon Bar, Klein directly returned to his inn. Just as he was packing his luggage, the gigantic skeleton messenger appeared suddenly. It originally wanted to pat Klein on the shoulder, but it failed due to its nearly 4-meter-tall body with its head penetrating through the ceiling. All it could do was throw the letter ahead before collapsing into nothingness. Mr. Azarchus finally replied. It has almost been a week. Has the messenger been changed? It looks like the original one and would make the corresponding warning. Klein caught the letter and unfolded it. I'm very sorry that I'm only replying to you today. Perhaps it's because the memories I've recovered has exceeded the limits of my body. I had to spend several days in a deep sleep to adapt to it. The matters you described does coincide with the traits of a marauder pathway. The corresponding sequence 4 is parasite. In higher sequences, they possess the beyond powers of parasitized bodies. According to what I know, there are 2 types of parasitizing. The first type is a preliminary state. The parasite would borrow the host's body to hide himself, so as to extend his lifespan and recover from his injuries. He can see and hear whatever the host sees and hears, but he is unable to interfere with the host's thoughts or steal his thoughts. Therefore, for a host to converse with the parasite, he will have to be the first to speak. The other is full control. The parasite is nearly fused with the host's spirit body, knowing and understanding his thoughts, as well as take over control of the body. Faced against the first type of parasite, one can inform the host via dreams or a subconscious conversation without worrying about being discovered by the parasite. This is because the parasite has to use the host's senses to sense his surroundings. For the second state, there is no way to converse with the host without the parasite's knowledge. However, there is a chance of eradicating the parasite, which is to rely on the host's faith. It's very difficult for me to accurately describe such matters, and all I can say is that when one opens his heart while praying, the target of the prayer would be able to discover the existence of the parasite, and through a particular ritual, provide feedback to complete the separation or eradication. Of course, the prerequisite is that the host himself doesn't know of this. Otherwise, the parasite would definitely be alerted and begin carrying out preventive measures. Isn't the latter situation somewhat similar to Little Sun's? He prayed to me without much thought, and I discovered the existence of Amon's avatar. Then, with a concealed goal, I taught him the secret deed ritual and used it to cleanse the parasite. Klein instantly had a deeper understanding of the previous situation he was in. However, I'm currently unable to determine which state my dear poet is in. Back in Tingen, he would occasionally talk to himself. This might be a result of the first type of parasitic states, but the problem lies in the fact that it has been months. It's possible that the parasite has completed his complete control of Leonard. I have to first confirm the matter before knowing what I should do. Otherwise, rashly entering his dream will only lead to preemptively warning the parasite, making the problem more serious and harder to resolve. If it's the second parasitic state, my dear poet believes the goddess, but she has millions of believers. It's unlikely that she would pay important notice to a red glove who's neither a blessed or saint. She's unlike me, the fool. I read every prayer and often provide a one-to-one service. This is what it's like during the startup phase. As Klein thought over it, he suddenly sighed and felt wistful. He originally planned on entrusting a task to Emlyn to secretly monitor Leonard Mitchell to see if he often whispered to himself. However, after considering how Emlyn had already appeared before Leonard and the parasite because of Tinder, there was a high chance that he was a target they were wary of or a target of investigation. Therefore, he rationally abandoned such a thought. Miss Magician is only a sequence agent and a trick master. She doesn't have the ability to monitor a parasite at the angel level or a red glove. Miss Justice's identity is the best form of concealment. Besides, she's also a believer of the goddess. But the problem lies in the fact that she's back in her fief. She will only return to Backland in June. Mr. Hanged Man and Mam Hermit are at sea. As for Little Sun, there's no way for him to connect with the outside world. There's still not enough Tarot Club members. The factions they've expanded into are still lacking. I can't find any suitable person to help me complete this task. Among the people I know, Miss Sharon should be the best choice to perform such matters when it comes to concealment, but I have no way of contacting her. Even if I do it through Miss Magician or Emlyn Sai, I had fled Backland in a hurry, so I failed to consider many of the consequences. Klein raised his hand to knit his temples as he thought about how Leonard was an elite red glove in the talks. There were high-ranking deacons and the church watching over him, so it was unlikely the parasite would dare to do anything for now. Hence, he decided to put the matter aside and wait for a more suitable helper. Perhaps I can wait until I digest the potion and head east to the Sonia Sea to find mermaids. After I complete my advancement, I can return to Backland and do it myself. The experienced Klein didn't hesitate further as he rapidly made up his mind. Inside Sweet Lemon Bar. After the uneasy Bill handled 2 naturism sect believers among his close aides, he finally received some good news. Are you telling me that Admiral Mirius will be returning to Bayam today? He stood up with a cigar in hand. Suit Health nodded gently and said, his fleet left the harbour half an hour ago. It's steering towards the Rorsted archipelago. Few Bill didn't conceal his sigh of relief, having confirmed that the Admiral wasn't putting any blame on him. Just the thought of how Gem and Sparrow had managed to make the Admiral suffer the loss of so many of his bodyguards, the younger brother's loss of his position as Governor-General, the injury of his secretary, and the death of his mistress, he couldn't help but wonder about his own management capabilities. Although the responsibility of these matters wasn't necessarily Gem and Sparrow's fault, to have them all happen at once had made one believe that it was the crazy adventurer's fault. At the very least, he was unlucky enough. And as his employer and endorser, Bill believed that there was no way he could escape responsibility. He definitely needed to incur punishment from Admiral Mirius. His Excellency is indeed a demigod. He didn't let his rage blind his reason. Praise the Lord, may the storm be with us, Bill said as he struck his right fist on his left breast. At this moment, the subordinates he sent rushed back. Boss, Gem and Sparrow has disappeared, the subordinate reported in a hurried tone. Bill frowned slightly. Disappeared? Yes. After he checked out of his room, he held his suitcase and circled the area several times before disappearing, the subordinate explained truthfully. It's really difficult to monitor an adventurer who can shapeshift into anyone. Bill sighed and said, leave it. There's no need to seek him out again. After being targeted by the Mother Tree of Desire, Klein cautiously changed his appearance and identity, as well as his place of residence to prevent anyone from targeting him. From the feedback received from acting as Admiral Mirius, he decided to quickly digest the potion by putting it into practice. While riding a carriage to the Oravi Hospice Foundation, Klein once again stepped in. The person in charge of the registration was still Ma'am Joanna. She looked up and asked, you want to do volunteer work? Yes. Klein nodded seriously. Joanna took out a form and asked like clockwork, name. Klein smiled and replied, Sinbad Valentia. The weather in East Chester County during April was comfortable. The vegetation was lush and the scenery was beautiful. It was the perfect season for hunting. Audrey was dressed in a waist-fitting black riding suit with a helmet. She was on a burgundy mare that belonged to her, while in pursuit of a brightly coloured wild chicken. She shot a whistling arrow and accurately struck the prey. As a psychiatrist, her physical attributes had clearly been enhanced. Together with her education in archery from a young age, whether it was in shooting firearms or in archery, she was considered rather skilled. A golden figure pounced forward and rapidly bit onto the prey which had lost its life. It was none other than Susie. It's a pleasure working with you. The corners of Audrey's lips curled up as she struck her palm with Susie's paw with a smile. At this moment, the aristocrats surrounding her came over, either praising her for her hunting prowess or her training of her hunting hound. Audrey felt a little ashamed regarding the latter half. She had never trained Susie before. The aristocrats quickly dispersed as they continued chasing their prey. As for the low-level priest of the Evernight goddess, she came over and said to Audrey with a suppressed voice, you can receive the hypnotist formula after completing the final mission. Finally Audrey's eyes lit up as she silently nodded. To be frank, if she was still the green and squeamish noble lady of the past, she would have long lost the patience to accumulate the required contributions and would have ended up requesting the purchase of the hypnotist potion formula at the Tarot Club. But she knew very well that building up contributions would aid her infiltration into the psychology alchemists. She would be more trusted and build up a good foundation for her to receive the high sequence potion formulas in the future. Therefore, she patiently performed matters that were either uninteresting or interesting. Of course, Audrey didn't waste the past 2 months. She had been eavesdropping on the conversations of the aristocrats and maid servants, before guiding them to pour out their frustrations and aid them in defeating their negative emotions. This allowed her to act as a psychiatrist very perfectly. During this process, she realized that she would unknowingly eavesdrop, observe, and steer the people around her, to understand their flaws in habitual thought processes. She believed that she could disadvantage or mentally break any one of them without leaving a mark. She could also get them to help her by their own will without them even realizing it. It was to be said that it's actually quite terrifying, just like monsters in the legends, who can grasp your minds as she recalled, Audrey couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Smin was somewhat unaccustomed to horse riding as she carefully circled the area and said, Stone University's Associate Professor Michel is a collector. We wish for you to purchase a notebook from the 20-Year War. The 20-Year War referred to a war between the Loam Kingdom and Visak Empire in the 5th Epoch's year 621-642. The former was defeated and lost the ancient Elves Island, which was present-day Sonia Island. Stone University Professor Michel notebook from the 20-Year War era. Audrey extracted the key terms in the words and glanced at Susie, who was running happily in front of the mare. She went straight to the point by asking, Ma'am Smin, what kind of notebook is it? I'm not sure. All I know is that it belongs to the period of the 20-Year War. It's part of Associate Professor Michel's collection. It has an important characteristic. The patterns on the cover faintly forms a dragon. Smin didn't hide it from Audrey as she told her all the information she knew. Audrey, who silently listened to her descriptions, restrained her burgundy mare as she considered how she could complete the mission. Visit Associate Professor Michel and view his collections before raising a request to buy one of the items isn't too difficult. Although it's embarrassing to admit this, it's quite unlikely he would reject me regardless of the way it's said. Yes, Audrey, you shouldn't be overly reliant on these. The biggest problem is being out of the blue. I didn't know Associate Professor Michel before this, making it very difficult to explain why I am suddenly visiting him. Besides, I don't know what the notebook means to him. Announcing my desire to purchase it might result in him being alert and wary. Jen's elder brother is studying at Stone University. At the last gathering, he depicted his penchant for describing and discussing matters. If I were to invite him and his sister to the next afternoon tea and steer the topic towards history, archaeology, or collections, then he will likely mention Associate Professor Michel. Yes, at a university, there's definitely not many people who can be called collectors. With such a precursor, I can send someone to pay a visit to Associate Professor Michel and make the request to view his collection. At the first meeting, I'll try my best not to show my desire for it. I'll observe the owner's actions and guide him to reveal his true self. This will be helpful for me to use suitable matters for suitable requests at a suitable time. After confirming her line of thought, Audrey nodded at Smin and smiled. I'll work hard to complete the mission, but I can't guarantee success. Just as she said that, she tightened the girth before shooting forward like an arrow, heading straight for a reddish-brown fox that was darting around in a hunting encirclement. Above the tumultuous sea, the Blue Avenger was like a leaf tumbling amidst heavy squalls. From time to time, it would be thrown up before crashing back into the waves, but it maintained a stunning sense of balance without any signs of capsizing. Inside the captain's cabin, Alger Wilson was floating around the window as he looked at the waves outside, which were as high as mountains. There were forceful winds blowing around him in silence. Some time later, he landed his feet onto the carpet. Wind Blessed is indeed a sequence that can be easily acted, based on its name. The only problem is that it occasionally makes me irascible, completely matching the characteristics of a gale Alger sighed inwardly without any delight. Over the past 2 months or so, he had failed to obtain the Ocean Songs to formula through his own resource channels and the Tarot Club's trades. After all, it was that of a sequence 5, the sequence closest to a demigod. The corresponding formula was already something where demand far outstripped supply. Even with boatloads of money and the willingness to pay a premium, it was very difficult to buy one. Normally speaking, joining the corresponding church or organization was the most effective method of obtaining the corresponding formula, but as a Church of Storm's bishop, Alger was unable to rely on this method. Due to particular secrets, he needed to hide his strength in order to win the freedom he needed to take action and be under light monitoring. Only after he had sufficient confidence would he head for a place and complete the goal he had been waiting for all this time. To his joy, he didn't waste the past 2 months. At the very least, the speed at which he digested the Wind Blessed potion was pretty decent. The Wind Blessed is simple. Ocean Songster is said to be quite difficult, must I frequently sing. Alger couldn't help but turn his head and look towards the deck. Although he was separated from them by several rooms, he could still hear the drunken sailors singing with gusto, creating a din that could rival the storm's roars. Alger unknowingly frowned. Backland, Chilwood Borough, Sind Circus. Ma'am, didn't you say that you're performing magic? Why are you dressed like that? A youth asked the woman dressed in a pitch-black pointed hat and dress of the same colour in puzzlement. I don't know why I'm wearing this as well. Perhaps it's because of my first appearance here. My brain was freezing from the weather and my style was subsequently fixed. Force rubbed her face which had red and yellow paint as she replied with a smile. In ancient times, magic is often mistaken as witchcraft. But this has nothing to do with why I am wearing this. She picked up the middle of 3 porcelain cups which were placed in front of her. She then placed the white ball beneath it. Then, she quickly switched the positions of the cups before smiling at the youth who had questioned her. Guess where the tiny ball is? Isn't this one of the gambling methods invented by Emperor Cell? The youth said with piqued interest. But you aren't a croupier, but a trick master of the circus. Therefore, I believe that the ball has already been switched away. All the cups are empty. Force smiled and said, Congratulations, you got it wrong. She suddenly picked up the cup in the middle as a white blur flew out. It was a dove. As for the tiny ball from before, it was where the dove had left. Wow, golly, wonderful magic. Brilliant! After a series of amazed exclamations, Force clearly looked pleased with herself as she looked at the distant cathedral bell, put away her props, and returned to the tent where the circus master resided. Are you really resigning? I can double your salary. The circus master came over as he tried to persuade her otherwise. Unfortunately, I had already summarized the trick master principles by the middle of March and had already completely digested the potion last week. If it wasn't because the contract ended today, I wouldn't even be here today. Although being a trick master feels very nice, this doesn't stop me from my goal of advancing to astrologer. Teacher said that he would be giving me the formula, ingredients, and a gift this week. What kind of gift will it be? Sigh, the ravings from the full moon are getting more terrifying. If not for Mr. Fool, I definitely would have lost control and become a monster. Force extended her right hand and covered her mouth, languidly yawning. Then, she said with a smile, well, I'm actually a best-selling author. My next book is related to circuses, so I came here to be hired. A best-selling author? The circus master's eyes lit up as he said worriedly and expectantly, will you write bad things about us? Are there any? I had a great time for the past 2 months. Force took off her pointed black hat. The circus master revealed a sincere smile and said, Wall, man Wall, can you mention our circus's name in your book? To pay you advertisement fees. Of course, it won't be much. As you know, I'm responsible for the livelihoods of many people. That can be done. This circus master is quite smart. For the first time, Force realized that a novel could advertise just like in newspapers or magazines. Furthermore, the format was more obscure and natural. Amidst waves, a liner with rows of cannons traveled along a safe sea route without daring to deviate far from it. Any deviation from the sea route east of Orava Island usually meant disappearing. Even pirates didn't dare to stray too far from the safe zones. This sea was filled with unexplored regions, filled with all sorts of sensational legends. After 2 months of volunteer work and finding 4 chances to engage in true acting, Klein bade farewell to carrying patients, scrubbing toilet bowls, cleaning vomit, and other miscellaneous chores. He boarded a ship headed for the Gargars archipelago. At the tarot gathering in early March, he had hired the hermit Catlia in a private conversation. He would meet her at the capital of Gargars archipelago, the city of whiteness. He would then board her ship and head for the dangerous ocean, which was close to an illusion, on the far east of the Sonia Sea. There, he would search for unaffiliated mermaids who lived there. The hermit Catlia seemed to be very interested in meeting members of the tarot club in the real world. With just a few seconds of thought, she agreed to the world's request. However, due to the high level of danger, she had given a high asking price. £3,000. Klein's first reaction was to give up and take Mr. Hanged Man's ghost ship, but considering how there would be many sailors from the Church of Storms following him, making his freedom limited, and the fact that the level of danger in the easternmost area of the Sonia Sea was high, he finally accepted Mam Hermit's condition. As for her, she would wait around the Gardas archipelago for a month at the beginning of April. Any delay would imply the end of the cooperation. To not waste the £1,000 deposit, Klein didn't wait to complete his digestion before heading for Gardas archipelago from Rabbi Island. Of course, with the summaries and chances at true acting from before, he was already very close to completely digesting the faceless potion. Even if he didn't use true acting, just acting in his capacity as Gem Sparrow was enough to complete the digestion in 2 to 3 weeks. Due to this reason, as well as the world's identity being tied with Gem Sparrow, Klein transformed back into the lunatic and powerful adventurer once he left the hospital. However, he did disguise himself to a certain degree. As he watched the perturbed sea surface, Klein finally saw a port city that had houses mainly made of white rock. The most eastern front of the Fisak Empire, the capital of the Gardas archipelago, Nes. And finally overseas, Klein looked at a fishing boat carrying whale meat cruising into the harbour. Its ruggedness wasn't concealed. Meanwhile, he discovered several ships hanging pirate flags docked at the harbour without any signs of concealment. Indeed, Oravi Island's eastern front is a playground for pirates. Klein wore his hat and carried his luggage and left the cabin after the liner came to a stable halt. He went down the gangway into the harbour. After a few steps, he saw a crew of pirates seemingly entering conflict with a local gang. Both sides drew their weapons as they clashed. Klein calmly walked past, showing no signs of stopping them. At that moment, he saw a local pull out a few cans from his pocket and opened the lid before throwing it into the middle of the road. What's the meaning of this? Klein nearly laughed out before recalling an infamous item at sea. Gant wolffish. Gant wolffish was popular on the east coast of Fisak and the Gardas archipelago. Just as the thought surfaced, an indescribable stench seemed to inundate Klein's olfactory senses. His facial muscles twitched as he tried hard to resist his body's discomfort as he quickly left the region. A small number of pirates who were struck by the stench vomited immediately, while the remaining ones frantically fled while dragging their companions as though they had lost all their combat strength. A minute later, in a secluded corner, the crazy adventurer, Gem Sparrow, crouched down and silently belched. The smell of Gant wolffish is really pungent. Not only is it smelly, but it's also disgusting. It's practically a biological weapon. Klein crouched in the corner and took nearly a minute to recover. Before that very instant, he had underestimated Gant wolffish. He had failed to take the necessary actions to deal with the situation. He could have used paper figurine substitutes or create an invisible air tube to pretend that he was using underwater breathing, but he had done none of that. Now, he finally got a deep understanding of how wise it was to ban opening canned wolffish in public. Few Klein exhaled as he slowly stood up. Carrying his suitcase, he slowly walked towards the harbour. His first impression of the city, named as, was one of many white houses, with stone being a common material for the buildings. The second impression was that it wasn't too far north, but the temperature was rather cold. Even though it was already April, it was still only a few degrees Celsius. The third impression was that there were many wailing houses. Gigantic beluga whales were being dismembered for their skin, flesh, fat, bones, and grey amber. The latter two could be used to make pannier for banquet dresses or top-grade scented materials. Whether it was for incense or perfume, they were considered luxurious goods that only the wealthy and nobles could enjoy. As for the skin, flesh, and fat of beluga whales, they also had their own uses. They were used separately to make clothes, food, or oil-related products. In Nes and the Gardas archipelago, the culinary methods for preparing beluga whale had transformed into a unique culture. There were all sorts of techniques and famous restaurants. Klein passed by the various whaling houses, seeing separated fat being carried out on cargo carriages towards nearby factories that spewed black smoke. They were oil refineries which were very unique to Gardas. Beluga whale fat could be refined into whale oil which could be bottled and made into outstanding incendiary material and the lifeblood of particular industries. Very unique. Klein exhaled some mist as he stopped and watched for a while. Out of the harbour and into the city district, a cacophony of Fisak inundated his ears. Having mastered ancient Fisak, the source of the northern continent's language, Klein was long familiar with the language of the northern continent barbarians. He turned his head upon hearing the din and saw the tall populace with slightly blonde hair raising horizontal banners as they protested on the streets. The horizontal banner right at the front clearly wrote the reasons for their protest. Oppose the poaching of beluga whales. We need a sustainable development. PFFT. Klein nearly lost his cool as he believed that the concept of sustainable development was highly likely to be invented by Emperor Cell. As he swept his gaze, he looked at the banners behind it and understood the goals of the protest. Whaling for survival, not entertainment. Humans aren't more important than beluga whales. Greedy devils should leave us. At this moment, a policeman dressed in a grey uniform held a shield, riot fork, and baton to stop the protesters from advancing. After a brief argument, the scene quickly turned violent. Many protesting youths threw open Gant wolffish, as well as Molotov cocktails. The police didn't show restraint as they forged forward, raising their shields and striking with their batons. Klein pinched his nose as he watched the fire burning on the street. He realized that many passers-by were completely unfazed. Apart from a small bunch of spectators, the rest continued proceeding to their destinations. It appears that such things happen often in Nes do protests develop into riots. As expected of the Fisak Empire, Klein mumbled to himself, circled the street, and casually found an inn to stay. He continued registering as Gem Sparrow, unworried that the news released by Vice Admiral Ailman Tracy would cause the Church of the Ebonite Goddess to view him as a faceless. This was because he had no plans on traveling through the whale fishing routes to find mermaids who were believers of the goddess. He planned on heading to the dangerous region farthest east from the Sonia Sea. As for the safety in the Gardas archipelago, there was nothing he needed to worry about. This was a colony of the Fisak Empire. The only legal church was the Church of the God of Combat. They were enemies with the Church of the Ebonite Goddess. Klein was originally worried that he would encounter many faceless here, meeting 7 or 8 faceless simply from going next door to enjoy some whale cuisine. However, after serious consideration, he rationally eliminated this possibility. First, Beyonders from the Seer Pathway were rare to begin with. Klein had only met 3 Beyonders who were beyond Sequence 8, and second, Sequence 6 Beyonders were commonly seen. Even in a playground for pirates, those who had £5,000 bounties were considered rare creatures. Third, once a faceless of many preparations, they would seek out mermaids on a whaling boat. They would either begin having faith in the goddess, sink to the bottom of the ocean, or become research personnel. Otherwise, the extremely smart ones would seize the opportunity and successfully advance before leaving safely. It was very rare for them to stay on Gardas archipelago for long. In all of Nes, excluding myself, there wouldn't be more than 2 faceless. Klein straightened his clothes as he wasn't in a rush to contact Admiral of Stars Caplia. He came onto the streets in a good mood and began searching for delicacies according to what he heard on his travels. Raw beluga whale slices, fried whale steak, whale oil with skin, roasted whale meat like a standard traveler. Klein restaurant hopped thrice and sampled different food. Not bad. It's pretty unique and it's not very fishy. Instead, it's very appetizing and alluring. Bert Klein covered his mouth as he came onto the streets. He discovered that the street lamps were sparse, but the lights from the houses lining the streets were bright. To a certain extent, they reduced the darkness of the night. Ice-cold winds passed through the ocean, causing Klein to raise his hand to prop up his collar. The blue cufflinks had their lusters restrained as they were deeply embedded at his wrists. Compared to rings, items like cufflinks were more suited to Gem and Sparrow's persona. Therefore, Klein didn't blame the artisan for making changes without his permission. As for the harmonica that had fixed the summoning ritual of a spirit world creature, it matched Klein's inward intentions completely. It could be used for a year and a half. It was silver in color, exquisite and beautiful. When he received the harmonica, Klein had imagined such a scene, a crazy and powerful adventurer playing a sad tune on the harmonica in a silent night under the dark moonlight by the side of a boat. Unfortunately, the harmonica couldn't produce any sound, and it could only be used to summon Rionette. Shaking his head indiscernibly, Klein steadily walked down the empty and cold streets before returning to his inn. Using sleep to bring himself back to an optimal state, he went to Graham Street the next morning and entered a sundry store named Hot Whale Dance. Upon seeing the grizzled boss who was a head taller than him, Klein tapped the counter and said in Fisak, "Whale oil." The boss had wrinkles plastered across his face, but he only wore a coat made of beluga whale skin. The light-colored patterns had a strange beauty. How much? The boss was drinking large mouthfuls of liquor, ignoring the messy placement of the goods. 1¼ buckets, Klein replied according to the predetermined secret password. The boss's drinking actions instantly slowed down as he placed the cup of brownish-green alcohol onto the bar counter. "Do you want to try some? It's many times purer than Nepo's. It's considered the mistress of all Fisak men. This was a distilled liquor that's a specialty of Fisak. It's brewed with potatoes or grain. The alcohol purity was high, as stimulating and famous as Blaze. Compared to Sonia blood wine, its price was rather low, and it was well liked by ordinary physicians. There's no need." Klein shook his head. The boss chuckled. "What kind of man are you if you don't drink Nepo's? Are there only women in Loam?" He mumbled before drinking another mouthful. "Who introduced you here?" "Ma'am Jamuses." Klein said her name in the style of the local customs. The boss exhaled, causing a strong scent of distilled liquor to linger in the air. He staggered as he got up, like a polar bear performing at a circus. After giving the store employee instructions, he brought Klein to a tiny room on the second story of the warehouse at the back. "Let me search for it. Let's see," the boss mumbled as he crouched. Klein controlled the twitching of his facial muscles as he recalled a widely spread joke in the Loan Kingdom. When is a Fisak man not drunk? When he's in his mother's womb. After waiting for a moment, Klein saw the boss find a pure crystal ball from his rummaging. Then, the tipsy polar bear had his back facing Klein as he rubbed his hands on it, softly chanting the tongue-twisting ancient Hermes. The room gradually turned dark as all the corners without light sank like they were producing a strange attractive force. The crystal ball quickly lit up, producing the figure of a woman wearing a black, classic robe. She had an oval face and had very fair skin. Her eyes were deep black with a slight purple hue which was filled with mystery. "I'm seeing another Tarot Club member's actual appearance again." Klein stepped forward and received the crystal ball. On the opposite end of the crystal ball, the hermit Katlia could also clearly see the world. He had black hair and brown eyes, with a thin and angular face. Her gaze paused for a moment before she hesitantly said, "Gem and Sparrow?" She discovered that the true strength and standards of the Tarot Club members were far stronger than she had expected. The world was actually the crazy hunter, Gem and Sparrow, who was considered at the level of a pirate admiral. My various assumptions of the world were problematic, controlled, staid, experienced, and ruthless Admiral of Stars didn't feel overly surprised. "Yes, Ma'am Katlia." Klein gestured for the boss to leave the room. After it became extremely quiet, Admiral of Stars Katlia asked once again, "I'm very curious. How did you recognize my identity? I've been very careful when participating in the gatherings." Of course, she had jumped in fright when the world, who had chosen to speak privately with her, immediately greeted her with Admiral of Stars. And it was partly because of this that she chose to take on the world's commission. A secret. Klein smiled politely. As he didn't wish for her to make connections to Mr. Fool, he calmly added, "Your eyes are very special. Can I understand that is a form of praise?" Katlia smiled, feeling somewhat enlightened. She believed that the world had previously only relied on her eyes and other details to suspect that she was Admiral of Stars, but she wasn't certain. Hence, he had probed her with language, and her reaction told him the correct answer. Klein didn't respond as he switched to asking, "When can we set off?" Admiral of Stars Katlia thought before answering, "Tonight at 8. Dock 6. Not bad. There's no delay at all." Klein nodded slightly. "Okay." Just as he said that, the light inside the crystal ball suddenly converged as the figure dressed in a black, classic robe darkened and blurred before quickly vanishing. Holding the crystal ball which had turned very ordinary, Klein turned around, pulled open the door, and walked out. Glancing at the boss who was guzzling alcohol while leaning against the wall, he threw the crystal ball at him. The boss fumbled to catch it as Klein unhurriedly walked down the stairs and left the warehouse. Once he was out at Hot Whale Dance, he took out his golden pocket watch and snapped it open to check the time. "It's almost noon. Most bars will be open." Klein stopped a rental carriage and used Fisak to tell the driver to head to the Lardle Bar. It meant Dawn Bar in the local language. It was a place where adventurers would gather in the Gargos archipelago. To Klein, the gathering of different intel and news was meaningful. This might aid him in making the best judgment at critical points in time, allowing him to escape the misfortune of losing his life. Therefore, even if he didn't like bars, he often went there. He would get a cup of thick malt beer and silently sit in the corner of the bar counter and listen to any matters of interest which people mentioned at sea. In addition, he wanted to know about Roy King, who had been imprisoned in Bayam's Governor General's office. Over the past 2 months, Snake of Mercury Willowseptin hadn't sent him any dreams. Similarly, Fate Counselor Rick Shadow didn't summon his messenger to provide him any clues to a powerful mystical item. About 20 minutes later, the carriage came to a halt. A huge vertical signboard with the words Lardle Bar appeared before Klein's eyes. He habitually took out 2 Solian notes and handed them to the carriage driver. It was only when he saw the warm face of the carriage driver did he suddenly realize something. He was overseas and this was a colony of Fisak. It had its own currency. The smallest denomination was the Capique, followed by the Fisilver, and then the Goldhorn. They maintained the very intuitive base 10 denomination, making conversions very simple. I forgot to visit the bank to exchange for Capique and Fisilver. I used it all at the inn and restaurant. Klein was just about to look around to see if there were any banks around when a carriage driver happily received the 2 1 Soli notes. After repeatedly checking it, he beamed with his wrinkled face. Thank you for your generosity." Klein got off the carriage. While walking towards the Lardle bar, he was recalling the carriage driver's delighted look. Gold pounds, solly, and pence can be used here as well. Yes, Garda's archipelago isn't that far from Tiscata and Oravai. Many items would be sold here, and many Loan adventurers like to visit the Sea of Beluga whales. To have Loan Kingdom's currency being used in private is rather common, hey. Loan's industry and economic strength is greater than the Fisak Empire. It can even be said to be much stronger. The gold pound is worth a lot more than the gold horn. Wait. Suddenly, he recalled something. 1 gold pound could be used to exchange for 5.5 gold horn. This also meant that 2 solly was equal to 5.5 for silver. And in the city of White, a rental carriage cost 4 for silver an hour. There wasn't any prorated discounts. It was no wonder the carriage driver was so happy. Klein turned back and realized that the carriage had long disappeared. Sigh gently exhaling, Klein pressed down on his hat and pushed open the heavy wooden door before entering the Lardle bar. In this world, bars near the dock and factory districts often sold lunch and dinner. Therefore, they opened around 11 in the morning. At that moment, there were quite a number of adventurers who had nothing better to do, gathered in front of the bar counter. They ordered liquor and smoked fish or vegetable soup with oil floating on the surface. They had a great time eating all of it with bread. Drinking Lanty-proof and Nepos at noon. Are they planning to be drunk the entire day? The customs of Fisak are really unacceptable, Klein mumbled as he walked to the bar counter with a deadpan expression. He sat in a corner and rapped the wooden counter. 2 toasted bread with red sausage, a set of smoked whale meat, a bowl of thick vegetable soup, and a cup of Gilles beer. Gilles beer was rather popular along the eastern seaboard of Fisak. It was rather rare in Sonia Island and the Garda's archipelago. New here, the bartender glanced at Klein. A total of 4 for silver and 6 capique. I'm new because I don't drink liquor. Klein ignored the bartender's question and threw 2 solium notes. It was equivalent to 5 for silver and 5 capique. Considering how he was gem and sparrow, Klein held back the urge to get the bartender to give him change as he treated it as a tip. Of course, in a Butland bar, that amount of food would have cost him about 2 solly. Having received the tip, the bartender didn't ask further. He skillfully poured a cup of Gilles beer and pushed it towards Klein. The beer was rather black in color with plenty of foam. It had a pleasant charred taste, and there was slight stimulation in the mellow taste. It made Klein feel as though the alcohol content was rather high as he suspected if some other liquor had been poured in. While waiting for his food, he sipped his beer and silently listened to the conversations of the surrounding adventurers. And the group's conversation was mainly centered around how someone had made a windfall, who was killed by pirates, who finished off a pirate captain without claiming the bounty and instead inherited the deceased pirate captain's subordinates, which woman has had an illegitimate child, or who became a laughing stock for failing to perform at the brothel. When the Garda's specialty, thick soup brewed using sweet vegetables, onions, cabbage, carrots, fish, and butter, was served before Klein, he finally heard something interesting. An adventurer suppressed his voice as he said to his surroundings partners, "Have you heard of this? There's a 4th epoch ruin east of Gargas." "No, who discovered it?" his surprised partner curiously asked. The adventurer looked to his left and right as he said without much thought, "Gareth discovered it. As you know, he's a seafarer who's good at diving. As he was drunk, he was thrown off the deck and sank to the bottom of the sea. Who knew that he ended up discovering remnants of steel buildings? They were definitely steel buildings made from human hands." And then, his partner pressed. The adventurer chuckled. Gareth followed the ruins and discovered an abandoned sea well of unknown depths. It was already filled with seawater, but it still left him with extreme horror. Holy Lord of Storms, this might even lead to the core of the land. He said that there was something summoning him inside, but he didn't dare explore it. So he floated up in fear. A deep sea well, strange attraction. This might not be a 4th epoch ruin. Perhaps it's from the 3rd epoch or 2nd epoch. Little Sun had mentioned that during the Dark Epoch, sea monsters were subject to Elf King Sonithrim and helped him rule the bottom of the sea sweet, salty. And a little tartish Klein drank a mouthful of thick vegetable soup as he forked a piece of smoked beluga whale meat. The adventurers didn't talk about Gareth's encounter, as there wasn't any sight of heart-stirring gold or jewelry, mystical items, or beyond ingredients at the moment. The conversation quickly steered to a few adventurers who they weren't friendly with. They mocked about how they had married beautiful natives who all turned into stout and fat women a couple of years later. Their strength could even match those of those sequence beyonders. Finally, they concluded that might have to do with how people from Fisak had tiny bits of giant blood running in their veins. They didn't say anything of value until Klein finished his lunch and drank his beer, but the number of people inside Lardle bar kept increasing. Suddenly, the heavy door was pushed open as it slammed into the wall. A top-hat-donning young man who was clearly of low and blood rushed in. He shouted nervously, "Is there anyone from the Adventurer Association?" "Yes, Bilt still owes me the creation of one item." Klein watched as the young man looked around frantically while constantly turning his head back. It appeared as though someone was pursuing him. Before he could consider whether to render assistance, 3 adventurers stood up from different corners. One of them was more than 2 meters tall. He had wide shoulders and firm muscles. His hair was slightly blonde, and his eyes were a deep blue. He was rather eye-catching. The strength he appears to have matches with his substance. This isn't a beyonder of quite a significant sequence. Klein retracted his gaze as he became a spectator once again as he looked out the door. Soon, a man in a linen shirt and brown jacket appeared. He was of medium build, and his lips were purple. His brown eyes could hardly conceal the intense baneful look he tried to hide. Klein instantly connected the man to a portrait on a bounty. It was the second mate of the King of Immortality, Agalito, Slaughter Kishais, with a bounty of 9,500 pounds. This is a notorious pirate. Klein's nerves tensed up as his gaze locked onto the man. He naturally hung his left hand down as his body prepared to lunge forward. Kishais swept his gaze at the 2-meter-tall giant and saw Klein before retracting his gaze. He turned to leave the Lardle bar without stopping at all. Very decisive, very alert. Klein frowned slightly, confident that he hadn't revealed any killing intent. He had even controlled his gaze very well. Was he worried about that giant, or is his intuition very sharp to a particular extent? Just like the premonition towards danger like a devil's. Klein wondered as he drank the remaining Gilles beer without participating in the private conversations of the Adventurer Association members. He left the bar and came onto the streets. Now, he didn't wish to give himself new troubles aside from finding mermaids. After circling the area, Klein discovered that Slaughter Kishais had long departed. His whereabouts were unknown. Hence, he silently returned to his inn. City of Silver, inside the spire. Derek Berg once again met the chief of the 6-member council, Colin Iliad. He clearly remembered that nearly 70 days ago, Colin had told him that in 2 months he should prepare to be sent out on an exploration mission. "Are you done with your preparations?" Colin had his back to the window as he asked without any abnormality in his tone. With the axe of Hurricane attached to him, Derek lowered his head slightly. I'm done. In the past 2 months, through the patrol missions and arduous practice, he had fully mastered the various beyond the powers of Sewer High Priest. He was already not too far from digesting the potion. What he wished for the most was to obtain the Sun Pathways Sequence 6 potion formula in the next 2 to 3 tarot gatherings, so as to ensure his continual advancement. The release of Shepherd Lavia made him feel highly threatened. He believed that only by reaching the same Sequence 5 would he have a chance of effectively putting her in check and avert the potential danger of the City of Silver. However, with the knowledge of the acting method and without the lack of beyonder ingredients, all he needed to do was survive the various patrols and exploration missions and make enough contributions to make Sequence 6 a reachable target. However, Sequence 5 required a specific ritual which made it relatively difficult. The grizzled Kalin nodded. In another 2 days, I'll be leading a small team to the vicinity of the Giant King's Court. We will do a second sweep of Afternoon Town, which we previously found, and your powers are very suitable for such matters. Afternoon Town, having been brushing up on his knowledge of legends over the past few months, Derek was no stranger to this name. It was an area that needed to be passed when going to the Giant King's Court from the Kingdom of Silver. It was a town where humans and giants lived together. It clustered around the ancient god's residence, which was forever fixed at sunset, just like the last door that separated the real world to a mythological legend. Yes, Your Excellency, Derek couldn't find a reason to reject. City of Whiteness, in a particular inn. Klein sat behind a desk as he looked at the constantly changing clouds outside the window, silently awaiting the arrival of evening. At 8, he would board the Star Pirates' flagship, Future, on Dock 6 to head to the furthest eastern front of the Sonya Sea. No matter what happened in the Gardas Archipelago or this region of the sea known as a pirate's playground, they would have nothing to do with him. Therefore, he didn't attempt to hunt the small number of pirates with bounties on their heads that he met while walking in the big and small alleys or bars and casinos. He didn't want to mess up his plans of finding mermaids. My spiritual intuition tells me that Slaughter Clichés from Noon seems to have targeted me. I wouldn't mind if he wishes to send himself to his death. Well, battle strategy can be despised, but battle technique needs to be treated seriously. Without using the Sea God Scepter or Tinder, I'm at best a little stronger than him. I'm at an advantage by being well-rounded and strange enough. Klein half closed his eyes as he imagined the gathering of countless spherical lights, and he used it to enter cogitation rapidly so as to maintain the acuteness of his spirituality. After an unknown period of time, his spiritual perception was triggered as he opened his eyes immediately. At that moment, the sun had already set in the west. The fiery red colors seemed to burn sea as long shadows were drawn out through the curtains. The shadows seemed to come alive as they danced about before distorting and standing up to project themselves on the wall. Its pitch-black darkness was like a manifestation of the immense evil at the bottom of a human's heart. Klein watched this scene with a deadpan expression. He raised his left palm high as he slowly extended his fingers. The pitch-black shadow produced a voice that sounded hoarse, as though it held sandcloth in it. While looking at Klein, it said, "Gemman Sparrow, do not interfere in the matter that happened this afternoon. This is the will of the King of Immortality." With that said, the shadow slid down like flowing water and scattered into the darkness, having its original state restored. Klein didn't pay attention to the shadow's changes. Instead, he cast his gaze outside. He could sense that the person controlling the shadow was somewhere across the street. Hence, he didn't plan on acting upon an incorporeal entity. Indeed, Slaughter Clichés recognized me as the crazy adventurer, Gemman Sparrow, who loves to hunt pirates. That's why he didn't hesitate to turn around at noon. He might not be afraid of me, but there was another rather powerful adventurer present as well. The power he revealed just now is somewhat similar to the desire apostle in Bagland. He's more and more likely to be a beyonder from the Devil Pathway. Hey, using the King of Immortality to scare me. Do you think I'll submit just like that? I never intended to involve myself in it. By doing so, I'm actually a little curious. Forget it. Finding the mermaids is of utmost importance as of now. I shouldn't create incidents for myself. Klein retracted his gaze as he lampooned. He was originally wondering if he should report the matter to the Church of the God of Combat in Mars, but after serious consideration, he discovered that was likely to be meaningless. The Church of the God of Combat is the only legal religion in the Fisak Empire. The number of high-sequence beyonders they have is definitely a little higher than the Church of the Evernight Goddess, but just by a little. Even if the demigods of the Fisak royal family and military are added, with the extensive land and numerous colonies it has, making the number of critical areas that require protection crucial, they would definitely be lacking in manpower. The Gardas Archipelago, which is far away from the Empire and in a relatively ordinary location, with the only industry being whale fishing, there's no doubt that it's only an afterthought and doesn't have any saints protecting it. According to what Klein had previously learned, the Archbishop of the Gardas Diocese for the Church of the God of Combat was only a Sequence 5 guardian. Together with the Tribunal's Inquisitor, a baron from the royal family, and a commodore from the military, they form the highest level beyond the combat forces here. Of course, the existence of sealed artifacts had guaranteed the control of the area. Klein suspected that the Church of the God of Combat Innas had at least one Grade 1 sealed artifact. Only by doing so could they combine it with their fleets and beyonders to ensure that the whale oil and grey umber trade industry wouldn't be under the control of pirates and not end up as one of the vassals of one of the 4 kings. Under any sudden assaults, they were able to use it to last until reinforcements arrived. And it was precisely because of this that the officials in the Gardas Archipelago ultimately maintained a defensive state. As long as the pirates didn't cause problems, they were allowed to freely enter and leave. Reporting things wouldn't be of any use. No wonder it's called a pirate's playground. It's no wonder Bilt wants to organize an adventure association. Klein sighed as he gave up his previous thoughts. After dinner and resting for a while, Klein took out his gold pocket watch and opened it to check the time. Seeing that it was already 7, he held a ritual and summoned himself before responding to himself. He then brought different items into the grey fog while adjusting his inventory. As he was adventuring out at sea on the Future, the Murdoch cufflink and various sea god domain charms were necessary. Therefore, Klein left Tinder and the sun brooch above the grey fog. With creeping hunger as his main force, he matched it with the biological poison bottle and a revolver which was loaded with different beyond the bullets. He still had 7 purifying bullets, 13 demon hunting bullets, and 2 exorcism bullets. Wearing his coat, Klein placed down his Ike's whistle, as well as his wallet containing only 50 pounds into his inner pocket. Then, he stored the silver adventurer harmonica and charms together. After doing all of this, he touched the revolver beneath his armpit, polished the blue cufflink at his left wrist, and buttoned his double-breasted frock coat. He wore his half-top hat, picked up his black suitcase which contained only his change of clothes and some daily necessities, and left the inn for the harbour via carriage. After waiting for a while at Dock 6, he saw a gigantic sailboat slowly appear from the distance. According to his limited knowledge of boats, Klein knew that a sailboat of such length wasn't scientific. However, this didn't deter it from cruising calmly on the Black Sea surface as it headed for the lighthouse which emitted its light. As the sailboat approached, the flag gradually became clear. The crimson but weak moonlight allowed the people at the harbour to see 10 white stars of the same size as they circled a cold, eyelashless eye on the flag. Admiral of Stars, the future. The pirates and sailors who were watching over their ships exclaimed as every dock in the harbour was filled with stirred emotions. After more than 10 seconds, the defensive cannons on the two ends of the mountain nervously adjusted themselves and aimed at the gigantic sailboat, which didn't conceal itself. Clang, clang, clang. The distant cathedral produced light and ethereal chimes, signaling that it was 8 o'clock sharp. As the tenseness around the dock became more evident, the future came to a halt. At some point in time, a woman dressed in a black classical robe appeared at the bow. Her clothes were filled with different symbols and magic labels, making her look like a powerful warlock of ancient legends. Under the crimson moonlight, the ground beneath her suddenly lit up. Resplendent starlight scattered down, forming a long, transparent bridge. The long bridge constantly extended forward before landing on Dock 6. An impressive show was expected of one of the 7 pirate admirals. Furthermore, she's a full admiral, a rank higher than Iceberg, and ailment Klein sighed as he wished to extend his palm to cover his face. He didn't wish to let others know that the crazy adventurer, Gemman Sparrow, was cooperating with Admiral of Stars Catclear. At this point, I can only maintain my persona. Once I'm done digesting the potion, and by the time I'm back in the northern continent, there wouldn't be Gemman Sparrow anymore. Klein walked out of the shadows as he pressed the half-top hat on his head. He smoothly walked onto the starry bridge. His footsteps were firm as Klein walked with his back straight while being targeted by numerous defensive cannons. Under the gazes with ambiguous meanings, he unhurriedly walked to the dock future. The bridge under his feet was transparent as the dark blue sea water which was almost black-ebbed beneath him. It would make anyone with acrophobia turn limp. Thankfully, I've long become a clown. I've even jumped off a clock tower. Klein covered the last 10 meters with a cold expression before stepping onto the deck of the future. Faced with the black-eyed Admiral of Stars Catclear, who had purple tint to her eyes, he didn't show any nervousness. He took off his hat and bowed. Good evening, ma'am. While Klein bowed, the purple tinting black-haired Catclear's eyes converged as they seemed to turn into an abyss that could suck up souls. What already exuded an air of mystery had turned even more obvious. She saw that the astral projection deep inside Gemman Sparrow's ether body was pure darkness. In minute areas, there were dark flows with unending changes. She saw that Gemman Sparrow's left hand was bright and lustrous, but it was stained with a sanguine colour that couldn't be dispersed. She saw a blue luster by Gemman Sparrow's wrist and a silver flow on his left pocket. The colours were bright and obvious as though they were connected to the illusory, stacked spirit world. There was the sound of the tide and the illusory sounds of wind surrounding the items. She saw an intermix of green and black lusters by Gemman Sparrow's right pocket, as well as 2 points of golden, silver, and bronze under his armpit. At his chest, there was a deep greyish-white like rotting death. 4 mystical items and beyond artifacts or spirituality charms in units of 10. Catclear's eyes were a little dazzled, but she couldn't help but close them for a moment. She nodded as well. Good evening, Mr. Sparrow. Even as a powerhouse who was famous across the seas, a senior member of the 7 pirate admirals, she seldom saw people who armed themselves to the teeth with beyond items. Of course, she had also seen people with more mystical items, beyond artifacts, and spirituality charms, but they had secret organizations backing them. They typically had several ships and more than 1,000 pirates under them. Many things needed to be turned in, split and shared, as well as sold in order to maintain and strengthen one's faction. Few things could be left in their possession as a result. However, few was relative. They could compare with what Gemman Sparrow presently had, but Catclear had reduced her items to only 2 after several trades. There were 2 items that were sufficiently powerful and mystical enough to match her identity as a pirate admiral. Apart from the lusters representing different items, Catclear's black eyes, which were slightly purple, could also tell that Gemman wasn't real enough. He seemed to be hidden behind thick curtains. This is the reason why he gives me the feeling like he's not a living person at the Tarot Club. He has quite a number of secrets. It involves at least a sequence 3 saint or an even higher level angel. Catclear didn't dare take another look as the glow in her eyes were no longer as profound. Meanwhile, she mocked herself, believing that some of her guesses about the world and Gemman Sparrow were somewhat funny. Involves a sequence 3 saint or an even higher level angel. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that, since he's like me, a member of the Tarot Club. We're definitely involved with Mr. Fool, who's likely a awakened ancient god. After exchanging greetings, Catclear didn't engage in further small talk. She led Klein towards the cabin. At this moment, the future, which had been docked, set sail again. A long contour was drawn on the surface of the sea as it cruised east of the whale fishing route. With that, the tense atmosphere at the Nez Harbor dispersed. Gazes from various sailors were cast over. Klein didn't show any signs of pressure as he surveyed the area and said with a tone as though he was back in his own home, "There are fewer people than I expected." Catclear turned her head and glanced at him before answering simply, "East of the whaling route is very dangerous. Only Ludwall heads there frequently as though he's searching for something. Apart from the future, the pirate crew's other ships wouldn't join us. Similarly, a large number of sailors have been placed on the other ships. Only the minimum number needed to guarantee the successful voyage of the ship has been maintained. A very wise choice, Ludwall, but Admiral Hellbud well. Mr. Hangman mentioned him a long time ago. He said that he was beginning to study Sonia Sea's eastern end of the navigation." Klein nodded a little without a word. This was Gemman Sparrow's bearing. He silently observed his surroundings and realized that the deck, the cabin, and spars were covered with mysterious and abstract symbols. As a whole, it looked like a gigantic ritualistic magic ceremony. It's like the Golden Dream. It's a sailboat of mystery, but it's not at the level of a ghost ship compared to Admiral of Stars and Vice Admiral Iceberg, Tracy, who has only become a pirate admiral for the past few months. Clearly is considerably more inferior. The Black Death has nothing special about it. Klein retracted his gaze and followed Catclear to the cabin's entrance. Waiting here was a man in dungarees and a white shirt. He was in his 30s and looked strong and fit. He had thick body hair. As for his forearm, which was exposed outside, it seemed like he was donning a brown sweater. He wore a circular hair with a depression in the middle as he revealed a smile and stretched out his right hand. The first mate of the future, Frank Lee. "Good evening, Mr. Sparrow." Poison expert Frank Lee, who has a bounty of 7,000 pounds. Klein instantly recognized the man. Considering how Gemman Sparrow didn't have the habit of shaking hands, he bent his back slightly and said, "Good evening." Frank Lee retracted his right hand and glanced at Catclear. He said while maintaining his smile, "You seem to know me." "That's right. The picture I took before is on my arrest warrant. Don't mind the poison expert title. I'm a very friendly person, as long as I'm not facing those dumb bastards. My greatest hobby is to study soil and figure out cross-breeding techniques. Believe me, this is the future of humanity. But the people from the Church of Mother Earth don't believe him." Catclear gave Klein an introduction in the most subtle manner. "He's originally someone from the Church of Mother Earth. Cross-breeding techniques are good. As long as the quantity rises, it will be able to provide for more humans. Raising the poverty line, Klein looked at Frank Lee, and he calmly said courteously and truthfully, "This is something commendable. You are indeed an adventurer who doesn't share the viewpoint of the common man. Excellent, excellent. There are just too few people like you." Frank Lee's blue eyes revealed a clear look of pleasant surprise. "I've only tried crossbreeding a bull, a cow, and wheat together, allowing calves to be born like wheat. For that, I was almost sent to court by the Church of Mother Earth. My benevolent mother, they don't understand your true will at all. Crossbreeding a bull, a cow, and wheat, you devil only." Then did Klein realize that his understanding of crossbreeding techniques was different from what Frank Lee was talking about. He maintained a stoic expression without providing any further explanation. Under the lead of Frank Lee, who was reeling in a sudden bout of enthusiasm, Klein walked through the corridor beside Katlia. After stepping on the steps and arriving at a higher level, Klein's spiritual perception stirred as he cast his gaze to a shadow beside him. A figure drew out of the distorted darkness, a thin and tall but pale figure. His cheeks were nearly transparent, and his nose bridge was disharmonious and torn. His entire being gave off a sickly feeling. "This is the second mate of the future, Heath Doyle," Frank Lee introduced with a smile. "Brothers Heath, whose bounty is higher than yours at £7,600. Klein quickly matched the face to the correct bounty notice. Heath nodded as a greeting before receding back into the shadows. "He's a Rose Bishop." When turning around to head for the captain's cabin, Frank Lee warmly mentioned Heath Doyle's situation. "You are telling me your second mate's sequence directly?" Klein nearly pricked his brows. He secretly glanced at Katlia and discovered her masked exasperation. "Are you puzzled and worried that he's a devout believer of the true creator, a lunatic who has been tainted?" "No, ha. He's a lucky fellow. Due to an incident, the ordinary him was scattered with the potion concocted from a Rose Bishop's beyonder ingredients. The potion seeped into him, bit by bit, and he survived the ordeal. Finally, he became quite a special beyonder. As he didn't experience the listener stage, he wasn't tainted, nor did he become a lunatic. As long as he doesn't proactively use the beyonder power, listen, he remains an ordinary person," Frank Lee said in a flaunting tone. "What an enviable fellow. He reached sequence 6 in one go. Furthermore, he didn't turn mentally unstable like the sea serpent." Corvettu Klein sighed silently as he watched Admiral of Stars open the door to the captain's cabin. Katlia pointed inside. "Your room is diagonally across from here. Frank will send you over. If there's anything, you can come to me directly. You can have your meals at the dining hall at any time. You can also get Frank to send someone to bring food to your room. What you choose is dependent on your preference. Admiral of Stars does things in a very clear and direct manner." "Yes, she's a mature and wise lady," Klein praised inwardly as he replied without a change in expression. "Okay." He took this opportunity to glance at the layout of the captain's cabin, discovering that it contained a bookshelf, a full-body mirror, a table, and a carpet. "She actually reads. Isn't she unable to digest all the information the hidden sage imbues in her?" Klein thought in amusement. At this moment, having seen the conversation come to an end, Frank Lee passionately promoted, "Mr. Sparrow, would you like a serving of roasted potatoes tonight? When you chew it, it's like beef and its taste is like beef, but it's certainly potatoes." "Will I get sick eating that?" Klein answered coldly. "I don't eat supper." "All right then." Frank Lee drooped his shoulders and was just about to lead Klein to his room. Katlia suddenly thought of something and said, "Mr. Sparrow, you've likely hunted quite a number of enemies and have received several spoils of war. I'm curious about the number of beyond the characteristics you have left. Perhaps they can be used to reduce the remaining price of the trip." Klein considered for a moment and answered frankly, "Most of them have been sold. There's Interrogator, Pugilist, and Lunatic left." He didn't mention the Old Black Eye or the beyond the characteristic of Nightmare. He really is the most famous adventurer during the past few months. Even after selling most of them, he still has 3 sets of beyond the characteristics. Katlia sighed inwardly as she pondered. "I want Pugilist." She had a warrior subordinate from the Gargars archipelago who had long made enough contributions to apply for an advancement. There was no reason for Klein to decline Katlia's request. He thought for 2 seconds and said, £700. "Very fair." Katlia didn't haggle. Sequence 8 beyond the characteristics typically cost £600 to £700, but there was often a premium if someone was in desperate need for it. After all, such items seldom appeared at beyond the gatherings. Klein didn't immediately complete the transaction. He raised his suitcase and said without a change in expression, "I'll give it to you tomorrow." He didn't bring the Pugilist beyond the characteristic with him, as most items of value had been thrown above the grey fog. Katlia wasn't surprised by Gem and Sparrow's response. She nodded. That wouldn't be an issue. She had encountered many similar cases. It usually meant that the Pugilist beyond the characteristic was stored with items which wasn't meant to be known by others. Therefore, it was impossible for Gem and Sparrow to open his suitcase in front of her to complete the transaction on the spot. A crazy adventurer definitely had his secrets. Katlia paused for a second before adding, "There won't be any surveillance placed in your room. Whatever she could see had already been seen by her." "It's fine." Klein curled the corners of his lips and coldly smiled. His previous considerations was to place down items like Azite's copper whistle and Will or Septon's paper crane before holding a ritual or going above the grey fog. It was to resist any spying in the sense of mysticism. Then, he could use the washroom as a way to avoid physical surveillance. Of course, he wasn't too worried that Admiral of Stars would go overboard. He didn't believe that she was afraid of the crazy adventurer, Gem and Sparrow, but that Katlia had no reason to do so. She definitely had milder and more concealed means of observing. For example, getting the help of a beyonder from the spectator pathway. Klein took off his hat, bowed, and followed poison expert Frank Lee to return to his own room. Seeing him walk off at an adequate speed, Katlia turned into the captain's cabin, picked up a heavy pair of glasses and wore it. Back land, at the Harvest Church south of the bridge. In the eyes of an ordinary person, Bishop Utravsky, whose height was that of a half-giant, put down the Bible in his hand. He prayed once around the hall and smiled. The number of believers is increasing. Is that so? Emlyn White, who was in a brown priest robe, was wiping the candle racks as he said without even looking up. He knew that the number of believers of Mother Earth had indeed increased significantly. It would have been a miracle in the past to have a handful of people be in attendance for praying on weekdays or in the daytime. Now, there was often close to 10. Father Utravsky looked down at the busy vampire priest and chuckled. Anyone can tell if they aren't blind. You have contributed greatly to this. If not for your concocting of the medicine and treating the plague, and your willingness and sincerity in teaching people about medicine, our faith wouldn't have been that easily accepted by the residents of this borough. Emlyn held a cloth and straightened his back. He tipped his chin slightly. I was only acting. What do you mean by our faith? Don't lump me with you. Emlyn's expression twisted before he said with a smile. Speaking of the blind, it reminds me of a joke. It's said that the demand for blind people in Backland far exceeds supply. This is because they are widely believed to be most suitable to be jurors. Father Yudravsky ignored the joke and benevolently said, regardless of the girl, you have contributed greatly to the spread of the faith of Mother Earth. Besides, this also proves that you have a kind heart. Pyre, I said so back then, but why didn't you believe me? Emlyn looked up at the priest's massive body before retracting his gaze in silence. After busying himself at the cathedral, he changed into his normal clothes and wore a silk top hat that sheltered him from the sun. He then walked on to Rose Street. He stealthily sized up his surroundings and didn't notice any signs of monitoring. The red glove named Leonard from before really hasn't appeared again. I thought my act of exposing his secrets and buying Tinder would result in me being constantly investigated in secret. Emlyn White shook his head indiscernibly as he felt puzzled. In the earliest stages, he had planned on taking in the Hanged Man's theory to incur the investigations of the Red Gloves so as to disrupt the monitoring from the upper echelons of the Sanguine. He could then achieve a perfect equilibrium by using the Church of Mother Earth's Blessed, Yudravsky. But things didn't develop as he had expected. Leonard Mitchell had apparently left Backland very quickly. At the end of February, Emlyn had made a detour to 7 Pinster Street while he was out once, only to discover that it was uninhabited. Without thinking about this matter any further, he walked to the end of the street, got onto a rental carriage, and headed straight for the Eudora Villa. He was left to a study on the first floor by an attendant where he saw many Sanguine who had recently come of age. Among them was a Sanguine who had already become a Baron. I'm not the only one, he thought before closing the door. He then said to the owner, Cosme Eudora, my lord, was I not called here because of a summoning from Lord Nibs? He had said my lord rather indifferently as though he was calling him by name. This was because he was also a Sanguine Baron. The difference was that he hadn't publicized it. Cosme was a very refined middle-aged gentleman. He smiled and said, all of you are outstanding young Sanguine. My grandfather has entrusted all of you with some tests. Another Sanguine Baron, Respatry, who was lucky to receive an inheritance, asked, what tests are they? Cosme drank a mouthful of dark red blood which was concocted with grape wine as he scanned the area. Perhaps you might not know, but the Snake of Fate from the Life School of Thought has disappeared for quite some time. As Emlyn White and the other Sanguine looked puzzled, Cosme continued. But I believe all of you should know that the Life School of Thought is a coalition which was barely formed thanks to their belief in fate. They allied under the massive pressure placed by the 7 Orthodox churches in the beginning of the 5th epoch and are formed by Beyonders who think of themselves as absolutely rational and aloof, those that worship the primordial moon, and those that seek the essence of life and spirituality. Due to the existence of the Snake of Fate, there hadn't been many serious problems internally. Their worship of the primordial moon was ultimately restricted to a fixed symbolic meaning. Furthermore, the process of formula exchange was molded with a master-apprentice heritage system. Unfortunately, with the disappearance of the Snake of Fate, this process has been disrupted. The primordial moon's believers rapidly turned passionate, producing a fracture in the faction that represents fate. An intense conflict ensued as a result. This matter was used by the Rose School of Thought. It dealt quite a sizable amount of damage to them. Emlyn White, Respatry, and other Sanguine remained perplexed. After sharing the background information, Cosme dived into the details. Worshippers of the primordial moon are our eternal enemies. They have always been hunting us, concocting us into potions to achieve strength. Now, we will not let go of such an opportunity. Here's a list of primordial moon worshippers and their situations. Whoever finds them and kills them will be the victor of this test. My grandfather, as well as various important figures, will reward you generously. If you complete a portion of the list, we will determine this by numbers. Of course, these people were selected, and all of you are capable of dealing with them. The rest will be tracked down by the important figures. Upon hearing the first few sentences, Emlyn White had no intention of participating, despite having hatred for those artificial vampires. He found the matter troublesome, laborious, and tiresome. He'd rather stay at home in silence to chat with his dolls. By the time he realized that it was a competition, as well as sensing the gazes of Respatry and the other Sanguine which were cast on him, Emlyn suddenly straightened his back and tipped his chin. No problem. His red eyes slowly swept across the other creatures in the room. On the future, inside a spacious room with an attached bathroom. Klein stood in front of the window, looking out into the undulating blue ocean. In a good mood, he breathed in the cold winds that came from the north. The flagship of the Admiral of Stars had already separated from the other ships in the fleet as it began to cruise alone. After an unknown period of time, 2 whaling ships appeared ahead. Once they noticed the flag containing the stars and I flying from the future, they immediately responded nervously. They quickly adjusted their positions, aiming their starboards over, their cannons ready to shoot at any moment. At the same time, spears and harpoons, which were shot using explosives, were directed in the same direction. The blonde and large fishermen from the Gardas archipelago held tridents and guns as they braced for an attack, either by standing or crouching. Klein also noticed that there were a number of women with figures similar to the Hulk. It was obvious at a glance that they were heavy and good at fighting. The future didn't mind their welcome. It continued cruising past them, heading deeper into the whaling route. After cruising for a while, Klein saw more pirate ships ahead. They were clustered around the sea route's periphery, their motives unknown. The future came close without standing on ceremony. Immediately, the pirate ships reacted like startled birds as they quickly retreated. Sensing the future slowing down, Klein left his room in puzzlement. Just as he approached the captain's cabin, he discovered Katlia walking out. This woman wore a thick pair of glasses on her nose bridge, hiding her mysterious purple eyes. She glanced at Klein and said succinctly, "Someone discovered a ruin which is said to be from the 4th epoch at the bottom of the sea in the waters around here. We plan on taking a look while on the way." Bottom of the sea, ruin from the 4th epoch. Klein instantly recalled the rumor he had heard from the Lardle Bar. So this piece of news has already spread? I was wondering why I got to learn it so easily, he said inwardly in enlightenment. Klein had a certain degree of curiosity towards the outcome of the exploration. He didn't ask further as he walked past the captain's cabin and walked down the stairwell. After a few seconds, he felt his throat itch. He couldn't help but raise his fist to his mouth and cough. Klein wasn't surprised by such a development, as it was inevitable. He had carried the biological poison bottle for more than 2 hours last night. Only when it was late at night and his confirmation that Admiral of Stars and crew didn't have any intention of attacking him did he move the mystical item into a black suitcase. Sadly, he ended up falling sick. Of course, the amount of time he brought the biological poison bottle with him wasn't considered long. His body wasn't in a weakened state, so his resulting illness wasn't anything serious. He just felt his tonsils swell in pain. Katlia, who was walking slowly behind, saw this scene, but she didn't find it a problem. Instead, she found it normal. It was common knowledge for knowledgeable Beyonders that mystical items were bound to have negative side effects. Furthermore, they would learn from the 7 Orthodox churches and categorize those with serious side effects which made them impossible to possess or use for prolonged time as sealed artifacts. The reason why Katlia had sold or exchanged many of her low and mid-level mystical items was firstly because she wanted to better strengthen her survivability. Secondly, the various negative effects from multiple items were troubling. Often, one could avoid one but not the other. Some negative effects might even stack and synergize into something worse. Therefore, to most Beyonders, the disadvantages surpassed the advantages. She discovered that Gem and Sparrow had used mystical items, beyond the weapons, and spirituality charms to arm himself to the teeth. While being amazed, she was already guessing at the type of negative effects he was facing. From what she saw today, it was a temporary simple illness. With steady steps, Klein arrived on the deck and saw Frank Lee. He was still dressed in a white shirt and dungarees. His arm was stained with dirt as though he wasn't afraid of the cold winds that blew down at him. "Good morning, Gemma." Frank warmly waved his hand and said, "Here, try my latest product. This is definitely the most welcomed item at sea." As he said, he raised his other hand. And it was a wide and fat fish of an unknown breed. "No, I don't want to know what monster you have cooked up this time." Klein paused in his footsteps as he looked at him with a cold expression. Frank Lee didn't discover any problems with his attitude. He pulled out a dagger from his waist and stabbed the fish before slicing a hole open. Blood flowed out and accurately landed in a large beer cup on the deck. It didn't emit any fishy smell. "Smell that. It's such an intoxicating alcoholic fragrance." Frank Lee half closed his eyes as he fervently said, "This is a fish who has red wine replacing its blood. As such, the wine contains lots of nutrients." Klein realized he was at a loss for words. Frank looked at the surrounding sailors in excitement before saying to Gem and Sparrow, "Do you know what's the most troubling matter out at sea? That's when we run out of alcohol without being anywhere close to shore. As long as this kind of fish can rapidly reproduce and become the sea's primary produce, then we won't be lacking any alcohol no matter where we are. By the way, they can be categorized by species. Some will produce lamprey-proof, others plus, red wine, and beer. The beer needs to come from sharks or whales. Otherwise, there won't be enough. Isn't the most troubling matter the lack of water? Of course, all of you can use beer to replace water most of the time because it doesn't easily spoil those poor fishes." Klein was pondering over a response to Frank when Katlia came on deck. She walked past him and questioned her first mate. "Is Nina done with her preparations?" "Yes, she has already finished a bottle of Nepos." Frank pointed at the shadow formed by the sails. "The so-called preparations are to drink a bottle of Nepos, a specialty of Fisak. The Nepos which can light a fire." Klein suddenly felt that Nina, the lady mentioned by the first mate, was likely someone with Fisak blood. "Captain, I want a bottle of Sonia blood wine more." In the dark, a female figure slowly stood up and walked over. She was more than 1.8 meters tall. Her blonde hair was casually tied up into a high pigtail. Her facial features weren't anything outstanding, but she had the striking traits of someone from Fisak. Her skin was fair and her eyes were dull. This lady named Nina wore a black tight suit made of fish skin. The top and bottom seemed to be a one-piece, fully accentuating her stunning figure. Such a style was rather sexy to begin with. Nina's breasts were also far above what was normal. It was obvious what the surrounding pirates were looking at. Klein felt a little embarrassed and wished to move his gaze away. However, on second thought, Gem and Sparrow was definitely not such an undry person. All he could do was empty his gaze and look straight at Nina's face. "Gemmen, this is our bosun, Nina. She's also the navigator's assistant. Ha, her sequencer's name is Seafarer." Frank Lee still didn't hold back in his introductions. Apart from his research of crossbreeding, this poison expert is rather simple. I now recall that this lady named Nina has a bounty of 3,600 pounds. Her nickname is Seabed Murderer. Sigh, after seeing so many bounty notices, there are some I can't immediately recall. Klein looked at Nina's eyes and nodded calmly. "Good morning, ma'am." Nina held back a smile and sized up Klein. "Good morning, Mr. Sparrow. I'm very curious if Vice Admiral Ailment is really as charming as the rumors say." As a female pirate who had mixed with low and mid-class people for extended periods of time, she was always very frank and direct towards both men and women. She didn't show any coyness. She had originally planned on asking Gem and Sparrow if she was lacking in charm, or ask if he was the cold type, which resulted in her being completely ignored or him showing any reaction. But considering how the man standing before her was a powerful guy, an adventurer who nearly successfully hunted Vice Admiral Ailment, or a lunatic who could draw his gun and shoot at any moment, she rationally held back her jesting words. She switched to asking about Vice Admiral Ailment. "How am I to answer you?" Klein gloomily said. "Her bounty is extremely charming." Nina was taken aback, somewhat at a loss for a response to continue the conversation. Hence, she turned to look at Admiral of Stars. "Captain, do we begin now?" Katlia, who felt her bounty flash through her mind for some baffling reason, nodded. "Begin." Just as she said that, Nina took large strides to the side of the ship. With her right hand supporting herself, she leaped into the sea, swimming downwards like a gigantic black fish. At the same time, there were a few splashes. A few sailors had jumped down as well to provide her aid. This she begins at the mention of it. She didn't need any additional time to prepare. This lady has the temperament of the Church of Storms. As expected of a Beyonder from the sailor pathway, Klein looked out the ship as he couldn't help but cough. "You're sick?" Frank Lee asked directly. Klein nodded slightly and said, "A little." Frank thought for a moment. He didn't say a word as he rushed back into the cabin, his destination unknown. By the side, Katlia nudged her heavy glasses and smiled. Frank is a poison expert, but he's also an outstanding doctor. As expected of someone from the planter pathway, Klein didn't ask further as he stood there, awaiting Nina's preliminary exploration. Seeing the sudden silence that became somewhat awkward, Katlia took a few steps forward and said, seemingly in passing, "In another day, we will be leaving the Whaling Sea route. But we're at least a week from those waters." Klein thought before asking. "That is if we follow the Whaling Sea route. In fact, this will lead further north and be more roundabout. I know of a secret sea route that can allow us to reach the waters you wish to go to in 2 to 3 days. Katlia's gaze looked at Klein's eyes through her thick glasses, as though she wanted to tell how much she knew of the extremely dangerous waters. Klein considered and simply said, "Very good. That's exactly what I want. In addition, those waters are more illusory than real." Katlia retracted her gaze in thought as she looked at the entrance to the cabin. Frank Lee ran over and held a green apple in his hand. "This is the outcome of another one of my projects. It's a crossbreed of medicine and fruits. It makes the consumption of medicine more enjoyable." He beamed as he handed Klein the apple. "I'm afraid I'll end up even sicker after eating it." Klein glanced at Admiral of Stars and saw her nod gently. Only then did he inwardly force himself to accept the apple while appearing calm on the outside. He then bit down at the apple. It had the taste of a normal apple. It just had a lot more juice, and the insides were softer. After a few bites, Klein discovered that his throat suddenly wasn't hurting. He didn't realize when he stopped coughing. I have to say that it's rather magical as long as it doesn't involve animals and humans. Frank Lee is really a genius that should be taken seriously in the Church of Mother Earth. Unfortunately, he ultimately became a devil-like person. Klein looked at the poison expert and said frankly, "It's healed." Very good. Frank didn't praise himself as he began casually introducing the pirates on the deck. After a while, Nina and the other supporting sailors swam up to the surface and returned to the ship. She held a metallic piece that had been rotten into an identifiable state and a piece of black hardened mud that was filled with honeycombed holes. She grumbled to Catleya, "Captain, there's no deep-sea well. That well's mouth isn't even bigger than my breasts. Of course, it's very deep and dark. It's unknown what's hidden in it." She gestured using her hands. Exaggeration is a common trait of pirates and adventurers. Catleya nodded without using the term bragging. "The diameter of the well's mouth is that small." Klein puzzledly looked at the item in Nina's hand as he politely diverted his gaze from her body, which had streams of water flowing down. Catleya's gaze moved in sync with his as she said, "Go into the details.